next morning they basically said, we don't see enough progress. We're we're going to wait like another hour. But at that point too, they decided to break my water. They had seen some meconium, and they said, things don't look good. We've got the internal fetal monitoring, which was also traumatic to know, what that entails and what they were doing. Was thinking about the baby, and it was back in my mind too. They said, the baby, we don't see, her heart rate keeps dropping, and it's kind of coming back up, but not in the way that we want it to, or for whatever reason. But yet they weren't wheeling me into the emergency room, into the surgical room to have the C-section right away. They were just like, well, we're just going to wait until the surgical room is available. So that I guess you don't think at the time, but I question that now. I had my epidural, and I really just was not prepared for what a C-section was going to be like. I basically, they tell you that you'll feel numb from the waist down, but I really felt numb from probably the breastbone down. And there was a point where I was on the operating room table, and there was a delay in my husband being by my side. There was a delay for me to hear the baby crying.
I think fear is what keeps doctors and midwives from attending a VBAC. And I think I think very literally that visceral sense of fear is what keeps people from doing it. And then they describe things like liability insurance, or pressure from their colleagues, or protocols from a hospital, or licensure restrictions. But I think that really fundamentally, some doctors and some midwives don't trust women and don't trust women's bodies. Frankly, I personally feel that as women, we were exquisitely designed for the processes of pregnancy, labor, birth, lactation, mother-infant attachment, and that really no amount of tampering is going to improve on that. So I'm coming from a place of trust.
I had a Cesarean for my first child. I was one of those typical a cascade of interventions that leads to the C-section. And I never thought I'd have a C-section because I was well educated, and I took 2 sets of childbirth classes, and it just really threw me to have a C-section. It became necessary when the doctors augmented my labor and put the baby into distress, and of course we had to do a so-called emergency C-section. When they were augmenting my labor, I figure I had a cesarean for physician distress, because I was not in any distress when I was in labor. My baby was not in any distress when I was in labor, but my physician was saying, this is taking too long, and telling me of the risks of it taking too long. So that was my reason for cesarean. Had a VBAC the next time because I hired a midwife to come to my home and follow me in my labor at home. I had a very long labor again, but nobody was in distress this time. Like, no caregiver was in distress. So we stayed home till I was 8 centimeters. We went to the hospital and had the baby. I also had to lie and tell them that I'd only been in labor a short time, because one of the rules they'd given me was I couldn't be in labor more than 12 hours because my uterus.
They were worried about that because I was not dilated. Heart rate started going down, so they decided to put like an antenna-looking device inside, like attached to his head, where it tells like how his heart rate is doing, and accurately enough, it was still, very low, and they decided that I needed an emergency C-section. So immediately I started crying because I knew my mother had gone through 4 C-sections, and that's not what I wanted for me. And I asked the doctor, but why? What can I do? And he said, the baby's head could come out, but his shoulders would get stuck since you had completely dilated, and blah, blah, blah. So since it was my first, I had no idea what was going on, and I started getting scared. Plus my baby's father at that time, he had no kids either, so he didn't know anything either. So I decided to go to the emergency C-section.
I have 4 children. I had 3 of them by cesarean, all of which were very unwanted and unplanned. And then my 4th was a home birth after 3 cesareans. My first birth, I was induced at 36 weeks for pregnancy-induced hypertension. Even though my blood pressure was the same on the day I was induced as it was at my first prenatal visit. So actually it was a false diagnosis. And after 3 days of laboring, I was told that I would never be able to give birth vaginally. So I was given a C-section. And when I got pregnant 2 years later, I looked for someone that would take me into VBAC at the time. But my records had indicated that I had an extremely small pelvic outlet and a narrow pubic arch, and the providers I looked for, I couldn't find anyone to take me. So I ended up going back to the same group of doctor and midwife and was coerced into a repeat C-section.
We love our uteri. We love our uteri. Deep down in our hearts. 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 I say deep, deep. I say down, down. I say deep down in our hearts. I say deep, deep. I say down, down. I say deep down in our hearts. I think we